refractive error, whether the refractive error is still present or this refractive error is going to emetropize within time. It also needs the interpretation of child's visual acuity, whether this visual acuity is normal for that particular age or not. You have to assess that also. And then of course its visual need also, that the child particularly needs this kind of prescription or not. With this I would like to conclude my talk, and I will invite subsequent
describing. Number one is the refractive error within the normal range for the child's age? The second part will be, will this particular child's refractive error emetropize? Dr. Swati has also already deliberated quite a bit on the emetropize. In the first 3 to 4 months of life is about 2 diopters with a standard deviation of about 2. Meyer et al. They talked about screening of normal infants and observed these kind of refractive errors as you see here, right from the first month of life and analyzing till about 4 years. And they saw a gradual decrease in the amount of hyperopia from about 2.2 diopters here down to almost a reduction by 50% by the age of 4 years. The multi-ethnic pediatric eye disease study from the United States also noted some racial variations, and they found that the Hispanics were slightly more hyperopic than the African American population. Donald Mutty, he also analyzed changes of these refractive errors. You saw Dr. Swati also referred to this paper, and looked at the progression of the normal refractive error from the age of 3 months to the age of 9 months. And as you see here, most of the error at about 3 months of age is centered within about 2 diopters of hyperopia. There were very few myopes, less than 1 to 2% of infants are going to be myopes. And by the age of 9 months, a large part of this graph has shifted towards emetropia, lower levels, and a few children will still remain hyperopic. As Dr. Swati already mentioned, most of these infants are going to have a very fast emetropization right from the age of 3 months till about the end of the first year of life. And from there on till about 2 to 3 years of age, the emetropization process slows down a little, but is still quite significant. And this process will continue a little more slowly till almost 5 to 6 years of age. And the average cycloplegic spherical equivalent decreases from about 2.16 to 1.36 diopters in the 6-month period analyzed by this study. And the components of ocular change, Dr. Swati has already listed some of these components which actually bring about the final change as far as the refraction is concerned. And as you see here, the axial length has increased by almost 1.2 millimeter here, but the refractive error has reduced over the same period, and the corneal power as well as the lenticular power have also reduced, compensating for the change in the axial length. And this is the study by Nair which I was referring to, and this emetropization process not only affects the hyperopes but also the myopes. So the whole process is geared towards reducing the refractive errors as the ocular tissues they grow. Now the next question which we need to answer is, will this child's refractive error emetropize? It is also known from these studies that children with very high errors are less likely to fully emetropize. And those who do emetropize, they lose approximately half of their spherical equivalent refractive error in the first year of life. So you have some kind of a guideline that if the child's refractive error is reducing rapidly and is reduced by almost 50% by the end of the first year, that this child is probably going to emetropize. And 1/3 approximately 1/3 between 9 and 21 months of age. There was also, in this paper, there was also a weak association between poorer vision and a higher non-cycloplegic refractoscopic error affecting this process of emmetropization. And finally, there is also an association between the lack of emmetropization and associated ocular deviations. Now, looking at this graph from that same paper, there is a very high likelihood of emmetropization when the spherical equivalent at 3 months is close to 2.53 diopters. But this probability of emmetropization falls quite rapidly, so that if the child's refractive error is closer to 5 to 6 diopters, there is less than a 50% chance that this will finally emmetropize completely. And this is the weak association which I was talking about. When the visual acuity is worse than 1.25 logMAR, the emmetropization process is slightly worse than when the acuity is better than 1.25 logMAR. The next question then comes is, will this refractive error disrupt normal visual development? Now, studies have shown that in children with +5 diopters or more of refractive error, 25 to 43% will finally have visual acuity worse than 6/12, and 87% will not reach 6/6 final visual acuity. And there is also been noted an increased chance of monocular or binocular amblyopia in 1-year-olds with 3.5 diopters or more in 1 meridian, and in 4 years old if the most hyperopic meridian is 2 diopters or more. So in the first year of life, the kind of magic figure which you are looking at is something like 3.5 to 4 diopters or more of isometric hyperopia. Those are the children where you need your antennas up, and you need to look at these children very carefully and at least partially correct them if possible. Now, a large randomized controlled trial of almost 8,000 kids, this is one part of the study, realized that children who were hyperopic in infancy were 13 times more likely to become strabismic, 6 times more likely to show measurable acuity deficits by 4 years compared to controls. And wearing a partial spectacle correction reduced this risk to 4:1 and 2.5:1 respectively. So the 13 times is reduced to just 4 times. So there is a significant improvement in the risk by wearing at least a partial spectacle correction. And the same thing in a pictorial graph. These are the non-treated patients. And you see they have a higher risk of both strabismus and poorer acuities, both line as well as letter acuity. And the treated hyperopes are quite close to the controls. So you can kind of bring the whole derailed process closer to a kind of a normalization by treating these kids. The second part of this study also realized that corrections did not affect emmetropization till about 3.5 years of age. However, both corrected and uncorrected groups remained more hyperopic than controls in preschool years. So the larger amount of deviations do not finally emmetropize so much that they are practically normal. And coming to the next question. Now, will prescribing spectacles improve visual function? Part of this you have seen yourself in the previous slides, that yes, you do have improvements, and supported by clinical evidence that high isometric hyperopia responds to treatment, although the time course of improvement may take a long time. Just a couple of days back, I was seeing a child who is finally now 9 years old, and when I've been treating her since she was almost 1 year old. And for so many years, right from the age of 3 years to 4 or 5 years, her best corrected vision would never go beyond 636, 624. But persisting with the corrections and at times also giving her occlusion for one eye which was slightly weaker, Now at 10 years of age, finally her vision in one eye is 6/6 and the other eye is 6/9. So it does take sometimes a long time for the vision to kind of get back on track. But the percentage of children whose final visual acuity and with spectacle correction, which was 6/12 or further, a significant reduction, ranged from 11% to, in some studies, as high as 50%. So you need to follow up these children very carefully and maybe be more aggressive in your follow-ups and your treatment if visual acuity is not improving the way you would want it to. And the final question to answer is, will spectacle correction somehow affect the process of demetropization? As I said, they did not note, Atkinson and colleagues did not note a significant difference, whether treated or not treated. But on a reanalysis of their own data, the compliant spectacle wearers emmetropized a little less than the non-compliant spectacle wearers or controls. So there was some effect, although it did not reach very high clinical significance levels. In other studies, when greater percentage of refractive error was corrected, lesser difference was observed between wearers and controls. So as you can see, there is some conflicting evidence coming from people. So this question is not yet fully answered. So you would lean more towards correcting high errors and preventing visual disruption rather than bothering too much about the effect on the process of emmetropization. In older children, the spectacle correction, once you are able to record vision in subjective terms, is a little easier. But again, there is no cross-board consensus on what to do for small refractive errors. You can prescribe small hyperopic errors as well, especially the ones where you have an association with asthenopia difficulty. More than 5 diopters in the first year of life, you would want to prescribe, but nothing lower than that. Again, undercorrect because...
Thank you, Dr. Baraj, for that section course on spectacle prescription. My topic will be correction of anisometropia and astigmatism. And the studies have shown that this anisometropia can lead to amblyopia. And if the amblyopia occurs in about 2 to 4% of the population, then this anisometropia is responsible for about 30 to 40% of the cases. So we must keep in mind that whenever there is a difference in the refractive error of 2 eyes, that how to tackle this problem. And a child with anisometropia or with amblyopia could also present with a squint. So sometimes we have to see that this eye which is squinting doesn't have the refractive error. What amount of magnification the eye can tolerate, or the difference in the 2 eyes of magnification which can be well tolerated, is around 3 to 5%. So if by any imagination this amount of magnification increases, then definitely we need to take care that by different methods we can correct this aspect of the refractive error also. Well, of course, anisoconia can lead to headaches, patient can have asthenopia symptoms, they can have vertigo, dizziness, nausea, reading. So many difficulties can be there if the person has difference in the refractive error of the 2 eyes. Now this photograph shows that how the anisoconia could be there. This eye is a plano with a concave lens. You can see there is a size of the image which is smaller. So this is a kind of a static anisoconia. Whereas in a dynamic, we see that with the change in the direction of the eye, there will be change in the size of the image. So especially if we encounter this type of problem, we need to, in addition to correction of the refractive, sometimes the refractive error correction itself will correct the anisoconia because we have taken care of the anisometropia. But if still the patient has difference in the magnification, then again anisoconic glasses, which are specially made glasses, can be used. Either we can use it as a magnification or a minification, or combination of these two in the 2 eyes can be given to manage the anisoconia. Now, how to take care of these 2 conditions, especially anisometropia and anisoconia? There are different options which are available. Glasses are there. Contact lenses also can be used. Laser vision correction also can be used in children to take care of the anisometropia. And some studies have shown that even phakic IOLs have been used, and they might be the treatment of choice for some people. Now you see here, we already saw that what are the different guidelines But here you can see a photograph, a 8-year-old child, not having much difference in the refractive error. If you see, the right eye has just a refractive difference of 0.5 diopter spherical with 0.5 slender. And the child was not using the glasses from the right age. So when patient presented to the clinic, we saw that the visual acuity in the eye having refractive error was 6/24. So now question comes, this child could have been prescribed glasses at an early age. So that is what is the role of anisometropia. So what are the rules we have seen? They might be applicable to both eyes, especially when the child doesn't have the amblyopia part. So if there is amblyopia, whatever is the refractive error or whatever is the difference in two eyes, we need to correct this so that we can take care of the amblyopia. Glasses, we are discussing mainly about the glasses. So glasses remain the most common mode of treatment for any kind of anisometropia. If the difference is up to 3 diopters, this can very easily be corrected by glasses. More than this, usually one can see that it can lead to anisoconia also. Then we need to choose some different method of correction of this anisometropia. If it is associated with astigmatism up to 2 to 3 diopters, it can be very well taken care with the glasses. So once we prescribe glasses, then we need to see whether the child is amblyopic or not. If it is associated with amblyopia, then we need to take care of the amblyopia part also. This is another child. This is special need of glasses. This child presented with a deviation, the alternate convergent squint. The visual acuity was 6/12 and 6/6. The child was hypermetropic and there was an anisometropia. So I gave full correction to this child. The squint got corrected. The anisometropia also got corrected, and later the child improved to 6/6. Now this is another child, operated both eyes. There is a pseudophakia in both eyes. So if you see the difference in the refractive error of the right eye, so there is a 5 diopters of astigmatism in this eye. And with this 5 diopters, if I give glasses, they just improve into 6/24. So such a child, we need to think of some other option like the use of contact lenses. So contact lenses can be prescribed if we find that the amount of anisometropia in a child is exceeding 3 diopters. Because up to 3 diopters we saw can easily be corrected by glasses. More than this will lead to problems. So contact lens can definitely be thought of if we are having this problem of astigmatism which is more than 3 diopters, or there is an anisometropia of more than 3 diopters. Same is true for unilateral high myopia. Sometimes we see that one eye is very highly myopic, cannot be corrected by glasses. So that's why one can give contact lens to the highly myopic eye. Sometimes we can use PM in children. The use of soft lenses, PMMA lenses or gas permeable lenses is of consideration. We can see how the parental motivation is, what type of lens they can choose. If they have high astigmatism, then one can think of using toric contact lenses. Like these are contact lenses which can be used safely. And if you have to choose toric lens, they have to be specially designed so that they can correct the astigmatism. Now coming to the laser vision correction. The laser vision correction in children, normally we will not think of. But there could be a special situations where one could think of correcting the refractive error by means of laser in a child's eye. Normally, if we think of an adult, we usually prescribe laser or LASIK surgery when the refractive error in the eye has stabilized. But here we know we are talking of a child where the visual acuity, the refractive error has not yet stabilized, but still we are thinking of laser surgery for the correction of the anisometropia. Many parents will not be motivated that child should be using glasses. So if we give them the option of laser vision, they might agree to this. So if the child is not able to use glasses or there is a intolerance to the contact lens, the child is not using the patching which is required for treatment of amblyopia, those are the cases one can think of using laser vision correction for the anisometropia. Or certain other conditions which have neurobehavioral disorders, non-compliant with glasses or contact lenses. That is the situation where one could think of using the laser. Laser like LASIK, PRK can be done in one eye because we are talking of anisometropia. So idea of using laser is that you reduce the difference in the refractive error of two eyes. So if there is a more than 3, we try to bring it less than 3 diopters, the spherical equivalent of 2 eyes. The idea is so that whatever residual refractive error is there, that can be corrected by means of glasses. So idea is to reduce the level of the anisometropia in 2 eyes. So the candidates could be those who are having high myopia in both the eyes and there is anisometropia, or a child who is hypermetropic, having deviation or having amblyopia, so they could be considered for the laser vision correction, or if there is a high amount of astigmatism. Because astigmatism we saw with glasses we can correct up to 3 diopters, contact lenses we can use, so if the child is not able to use contact lens or there is an intolerance to contact lens, so they should be the candidates for the laser vision correction. So what is the ideal age? The ideal age should be that when we can definitely see the amount of the refractive error in the eye. So once we know how much is the difference in the refractive error of the two eyes, so usually by the age of 3 years, we will know how child is behaving, is there is development of any amblyopia, development of any deviation. So those candidates we can consider for the laser vision correction. It has been seen that best corrected visual acuity even will improve once they are corrected with the laser. But laser we know is not very safe in children. The two major problems have been noticed. One is corneal haze, which takes time to disappear, and regression. So whatever amount of refractive error has been corrected, it tends to regress by time. So these are two major problems which can be seen in patients who have the anisometropy. There are different studies are available on the laser vision correction. One is by Amar Agarwal. He did laser vision correction on 40 children in the age group even 1 to 6 years. So he has chosen even a younger child to do the laser vision correction. They found that by using laser vision, even the best corrected visual acuity showed some improvement. So if the visual acuity correction was 70 before the lasers, which are available in the market, and they can be used either in the anterior chamber, on the iris fixation, or in the posterior chamber. Astigmatism, Dr. Brad mentioned about the astigmatism, and he has given us guidelines that what amount of astigmatism can be corrected and how it should be corrected. We again saw that glasses are the mainstay of treatment. If it exceeds about 3 diopters, then contact lenses can be used, or toric contact lenses can be used, or laser vision or phakic could be the next modality available which could be used for correcting this astigmatism. Now why we are all discussing about this anisometropia and correction of refractive error in children. It is basically because of the amblyopia. A child who has refractive error or difference in the refractive error of two eyes is likely to develop amblyopia. And we saw anisometropia is one of the main reasons in 30 to 40% of the amblyopia cases which could lead to amblyopia. So always look at the refractive error, we use cycloplegia, do the refraction, try to find out what is the difference in the two eyes and try to correct mainly by glasses. And then once we have corrected them with the glasses, there is a waiting period that we see for about 6 to 8 weeks, because sometimes the visual acuity tends to improve just with these spectacles. So not necessarily that we prescribe glasses and immediately start with the other methods like occlusion or pinlization or other forms of amblyopia therapy. But initially there one should see that how glasses are able to help the child. If after about 8-10 weeks we find that there is no improvement in the visual acuity, then only we start with the amblyopia therapy. So to conclude, anisometropia and astigmatism are the common cause for amblyopia in the pediatric age group. The glasses still remain the main modality of treatment for anisometropia as well as for the astigmatism. Contact lenses can be considered in some selected cases with the parental motivation, because in a child we must see that it's the parents who are going to put the lens and remove the lens. They themselves may not be able to do that. So the motivation and the parental cooperation for correction of this is very, very important. Again, laser vision can be considered an option in some cases, a few selected cases where we find that the compliance with the glasses, with the contact lens is not there, parents are not fully motivated. So to give a permanent remedy to this refractive error, one could consider that, okay, let us do a laser, but keep in mind that lasers will always be a problem, corneal haze, and always there will be some amount of regression. So it doesn't mean that child will be free of the spectacles, because once you advise them laser, they will always think that my child will be free from the spectacles. So this we must tell the parents that this is just a modality which we are using. We are decreasing the power of the two eyes, or we are decreasing the difference in the power of two eyes, so that the child's eye can use to the spectacles and the problem of amblyopia can be taken care. Phakic IOLs, it's a newer modality. Even the trials are still going on in the adult population in high myopes where the phakic lenses can be used. But children, of course, one has to be very, very cautious to recommend this type of modality. And the long-term results are still not available, because over a period of time, there could be endothelial loss which could lead to the corneal problems. And never forget amblyopia as a part of treatment whenever we encounter anisometropia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bansal, for covering the...
See, mental retardation, nystagmus, so these children have to be dealt with in a different way. So coming to the pseudophakia or the aphakia in a pediatric child, basically in adults what you do is just prescribe. But in children what happens is, what we are really concerned is the myopic shift, because the child is, the axial length is going to increase disproportionately. So it's up to 8 diopters. The child does not have accommodation now, he has pseudo accommodation which we have to cater about. Then the deprivation amblyopia what the child has suffered from. So how to go about these things? The problems are a rapidly changing refractive error in infants, as I told you, large myopic shifts till 6 years of age. High hyperopic correction. So if you have a child of 1 to 2 years, obviously you're going to aim for +5 or +4 diopters, which is amblyogenic. Hypermetropia, high hypermetropia is amblyogenic. Plus this child has already suffered, is already deprived from the cataract. So it's going to be additive. So that's the problem you're going to come up with. He has no accommodation because the crystalline lens has been removed. The stereopsis is very cross. So if you have bilateral pseudophakia, you have to get the retinoscopic findings. No need of cycloplegia here because there is no crystalline lens, no accommodation. So give a near add of +3 diopters and add to the retinoscopy in infants and toddlers. Because basically what they are going to see is all near. They don't have to focus at distance and near. So if the retinoscopy is +4, then we give a prescription of +7. We add +3 to it and give it. Whereas if you have an older child, then the executive bifocals are required. Like in this case, a +4 in the upper segment and a +3 add in the lower segment. A unilateral pseudophakia, as was told by the previous speaker, it depends upon the anisometropia. Large anisometropia would lead to accommodative imbalance between the two eyes. Because here we have to see the accommodation of the phakic eye as well. It's unilateral. And so this could lead to unequal visual acuity and a poor stimulus for binocularity. So everything is not adding +3. We have to balance it along with the other eye. The prescription would be same as bilateral cases, but the important thing is the near add needs to be adjusted, keeping in mind the accommodation of the phakic eye. So this is in brief about the pseudophakia. Now coming to the esotropia, the all important esotropia what we see. Basically when we prescribe here, it's either a refractive accommodative esotropia or it's a non-refractive accommodative esotropia associated with a high AC/A ratio. Our aim is here to prevent amblyopia, stimulate sensory functions and maintain orthotropia, thereby facilitating emmetropization. So everything is not visual acuity. You have to have binocular vision along with a good visual acuity. So basically the onset is from 6 months to 7 years. It's gradual, it's intermittent. Depends when you have to prescribe on the magnitude of strabismus. The near distance could be equal or greater than the distance deviation depending upon whether you have an accommodative esotropia, purely accommodative, or a high AC/A ratio esotropia. The mechanisms are either uncorrected hyperopia, where the child would either have amblyopia or he would try to converge and he develops esotropia. The other is high AC/A ratio, which can be associated with a low hyperopia, or you could have a combination of either of them. So if you come to purely refractive accommodative esotropia, which is not associated with high AC/A ratio, again, in children with strabismus, the best is do an atropine retinoscopy because that will bring about all the latent hyperopia what the child has. So in young children, say about 3 to 4 years, you do an atropine retinoscopy, that's good. It's again, it's based on one's experience, people carry on with atropine till 10 years of age also. So basically, if the infant has more than +2.5 diopters and he has an esotropia, you need to prescribe. Whereas children with more than just +2, you can modify depending upon the AC/A ratio. So coming to the other part where that's non-refractive accommodative esotropia, what happens here is the accommodative deficit was already present before the treatment. Or if the child is using bifocals, has been caused by the use of bifocals. So always in these cases, if you want to find out it's purely does the child have a high AC/A ratio or is it a hypoaccommodative esotropia what you're dealing with, the best is to measure the near point of accommodation, which can differentiate hypoaccommodative from high AC/A ratio. Although the management would just be the same, but the effect would be on weaning as excess of accommodation will never be resolved. So if you have a hypo-accommodative
and measures the eye from cornea to the posterior capsule. The surgeon defines the size and site of main port and side ports, and also can define the size and positioning of LRIs if they are needed. And here, these are the pictures showing how to, set the laser on when the laser is already docked. If you can see, it is docked on the right eye of the patient, and that is going on. And then this is the capsulotomy. And this is after the capsulotomy, the fragmentation is over. This is a picture of the laser screen which is captured on the normal camera. And now this is the picture of the patient in this trial OT, where the phaco probe will enter and remove the capsule and then the lens fragments. There it is. And this is the capsulotomy you get each and every time. Can you get it with the hand? I think one of the best, fantastic surgeons can get it in 90% of the cases, but you're getting it in 100% of the cases each and every single time. And this is the beauty of the femtosecond laser. Average laser treatment is 35 seconds. It reduces the phaco power by 50% because all nucleotomy, the division is already done. You don't have to hold, just take the nucleus fragments out. And there's 50% reduction in the phaco time. And you can have the precise capsular access of 4.5, 5.25, 5.75, and there is a 3D configuration corneal cut, which is so well self-sealing that you do not even require the hydration of the side ports or the main port. Also, it corrects the mild pre-existing astigmatism with the strategically placed corneal incisions of required size and depth. Safety is tremendous. There are no excess tears. I have used iris hooks in all those cases where there has been subluxation. No posterior capsule red. The buffer is 500 to 800 microns. There is no corneal edema, and I can show you a few pictures where there is absolutely no corneal edema. The very next day, the patient is extremely happy. If you have corrected the IOL power perfectly, there is no reason to have any corneal edema and vision less than 6 by 6 partial. There is no leaking incisions. What buffer of the laser is 300 microns, so waves generated by femtosecond disruption dissipate within 100 microns of the target tissue. So there is absolutely no damage to the endothelial cells. We have seen that the endothelial cell loss is in the range of about 1.74% in our femto cases over a period of 2.5 years. And that's absolutely much less than the more than 2.5% with phacoemulsification. The max lenticular thickness treatment laser is 3000 microns, and suggested minimum distance from the posterior capsule is 1000 microns. And we keep 800 microns, and this 3000 microns max lenticular thickness does not allow us, of course, to do a posterior capsular access, but it does not reach the posterior capsule as well. And that is the special margin of the safety in all these femtosecond lasers. There's another beauty of the machine. The air bubble generated by laser goes behind the nucleus and epinucleus, making a cleavage. And this air bubble comes forward with mild fluid wave of hydrodissection. There's already an aerodissection. There's a capsular, epinuclear separation from the nucleus, and that is the beauty of the thing that is
4 minutes
so
time.
easy. Yeah. So safety, predictability, reproducibility, and that's absolutely wonderful machine which you can have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Please stay on stage. Dr. Sundaramurthy. He feels that still the time is not apt for the conversion of the cataract surgery to the laser assisted cataract surgery. Dr. Sundaramurthy.
Good afternoon, respected chairman and co-chairs, friends. It's very pleasing indeed to
One minute, don't start the timer. Start from here. Stop the timer, please.
friends. The femto-assisted phaco, Dr. Bhati has narrated a lot of benefits. But look at this. Dr. Bhati is a good surgeon. I know him for 20 years. He's an excellent surgeon. And the regular no. Let me all have sympathy towards you. Sir, let us look into this. The convenience, the time, the value. Is it the convenient? The femto is convenient. You have to take the patient to theatres. You have to apply 2 methods. And it certainly takes more time. It is no additional value to the patient in the hands of a good surgeon. The pediatric cataract, when you do capsulotomy, then you have assessed everything in the posterior capsule before the surgery. And then the moment it comes forward, you will be hitting the posterior capsule or behind the posterior capsule. So these are the cases you must be very careful. This is one area I will accept with you. There is a online OCT is available. You can judge the depth of your incision. You can have a single planar, 2 planar or 3 planar. But I am asking Dr. Panesh Valmar, the senior surgeon sitting here, are you not making 3 planar incision with your knife? Yes. Then what is the need for this? Why do you charge the patient so much for that? So, self-sealing is equal to, your manual phaco is self-sealing to equal to a vessel. And epithelial injury is more with the femtosecond laser mind. Because the corneal injury comes to the epithelium is damaged. And when your patient is not cooperating and docking, you will have the epithelium is completely peeled off in a diabetic patient. You have to be very careful in those cases. LRI, I've been doing for ages. We have 600 micron fixed and you can do LRI. So the size, shape and astigmatic neutral micro incision is possible now, which is not introducing anything. This is the capsular axis of femtosecond. The continuous curvilinear human, I'm talking the manual. This, the capsular axis by the spots, my micron spot, there is a gap between the 2 spots. Will you say this continuous curvilinear? You cannot say this. There is a gap in between the 2 spots. So, the center you can sample 5.5 out of your experience you can do. Well covered IOL 90% of the time. And decreased PCO, well-centered IOL. So, for an average ophthalmologist is good, the femtosecond laser. But she is an honorable surgeon, respected surgeon. Phaco today is a gold standard. You have minimal energy for phaco chop. You don't do any manual chopping. You get pieces aspirated with improved periodic. Cortex easy wash out. Can you wash out your cortex in the femtosecond laser? Your life will come out. Because when you are doing a capsulotomy, the cortex also gets the anterior cortex. The cortex goes behind the capsular edges. You will have a hell lot of time. You have to have a second phaco dissection. You have to go posteriorly to, wipe out all the cortex. It takes a long time. The surgery time almost 10 to 15 minutes more. Actually, minimal ultrasound energy with today's phaco. I just show you this. So look at the capsular axis. There is a fibrosis. Can a femtosecond do capsular this? When there is a fibrosis, your femtosecond, no way. It cannot get the capsule. But you can make it as a very nice capsular axis. Femtosecond, everybody says 50% reduction in phaco power. Sir, I am just asking every one of you. Dr. Bhati was showing a picture where he was showing you 4 cuts. For chopping, a partial thickness. Will you say it's full thickness? It's only partial thickness because he says 700 microns above. For a partial thickness,
4 minutes up.
Nucleus cutting can reduce your phaco time. My full thickness manual chopping, how much reduce? So certainly you get subconjunctival hemorrhage, the patient is looking angry with you. Pupil constriction. There are 2 factors for pupil constriction. One, if your pupil is not dilated,
your time is up, Dr. Sundaramurthy. Your time is up 2 minutes ago.
Just one slide. The second is the protein release makes the pupil constricted. So cortex washet, I already told you. Ultrasound not reduction at all. This is I just want to show you, but you have seen this picture. There you can make partial thickness chopping. That will not reduce the phaco time. So, my friend, this new technology, not seen all the benefits, not known all the risks. To climb better is just false. Thank you.
Dr. Bharati, you have 1 minute.
5 minutes and 4 minutes. Thank you.
Yes, the judges.
Yeah. So when there are so many contraindications, don't you think femto is still in its infancy?
See, the contraindications are in, I think, 2% of the cases which you see in a routine practice. Those 2%.
You put a self-call and bought a femto laser.
I do have femto. I'm talking against femto, but I do have femto. The point is, commercialization is different, competition is different, science is different. I'm talking science today. I'm not talking competition or commercial.
Thank you, sir. Judges, the winners. When you have a patient with mild to moderate myopia, Rupal Shah says that she will smile, whereas Arun Modi Varman says he will use the femto LASIK. Dr. Arun, you are also here. Be prepared with your. Who will want to bat first? Rupal, you would like to bat first or Arun? Your name is first of the agenda.
I don't mind being the first, Dr. Varman. Good afternoon. A very information with the femtosecond laser. We are still afraid to get LASIK done. You would see so many of us still wearing glasses. What is it that is preventing us from getting LASIK done? This very rare chance of getting an ectasia because there is a flap in your eye. This chance of having a flap displacement getting later on, or the dry eyes. What is it that is preventing us from getting LASIK done on our eyes? These are the issues that is actually preventing us because you feel it's not safe. So what if there is a technique which can answer these? Then would it be easier a decision? Especially if you are in contact sports, if you are in a profession that requires, say, swimming, you are a scuba diver, you are an astronaut. What would you prefer, a flap or no flap? There are also these other things involved when you are using two lasers, especially an excimer laser, which is a gas-based laser, the performance of which depends on so many factors. The very difference in the hydration of the cornea, environmental factors like humidity, organic vapors, and if the fluence is linear, and therefore these scatter in the high myopic age group, and therefore enters relaxed smile. Chavita here? Excuse me? For the people who are not so familiar with this new technique, this is a cone, it's an all-in-one femtosecond laser treatment, where one pass of the femtosecond laser is done to form a lenticule within the corneal tissue. So this is the posterior part of the lenticule. There is another pass which occurs anterior to this one, which is separated from the posterior one by the amount of correction required. And this goes a little beyond and forms a cap, followed by a very small incision. And as you can see, this can then be very easily removed. The lenticule that you separated inside can very easily be removed through that small incision. No flap means no flap related issue. Small incision means you are severing only few nerves and therefore less chances of having dry eyes. And this very fact that you are retaining the biomechanical strength of the cornea by not forming a flap is the one that's going to make you decide whether you want femto-LASIK or smile in your eye or in your patient's eye. And therefore, when I started, I said there is no debate here. It is a much superior technique if you want a laser refractive correction on your cornea. You can see that the separation is pretty easy. I'll just go a little faster here. I'm trying to fast forward this so that we can see the lenticule coming out. Once you've separated both, you can deliver this lenticule out of merely 3 millimeter incision. We are also working on techniques which can reduce this size even further. Better biomechanical strength, it's like having a PRK done without pain, a LASIK done without a flap, and therefore I would say small is beautiful. Just give me half a minute. Ladies here, which rock would you prefer? And which car would you prefer? Ooh or ah? Slow or swift? Ouch. Old or new? LASIK or smile? The decision is yours. Thank you.
Dr. Arun?
Need my slides to come on. So here we are. I'll give my financial disclosure at the end. Dr. Rupal Shah gave it at the beginning. He said she's a consultant for Zeiss. So I speak on behalf of femtosecond assisted LASIK against SMILE. The Rupal Shah said that if you're an astronaut, you should go for SMILE. Unfortunately, NASA hasn't got about it. NASA approves only interface and not SMILE. Nor does the US Navy, Army, Air Force, nor does the Australian Army, Navy or Air Force. So they haven't thought about SMILE, and they really think that LASIK femto-assisted is the way to go. It's predictable, safe, accurate, and forgiving. We've been doing it for quite some time. It's time tested. It is the gold standard. No questions asked. Maybe it will get replaced by something else in the future. We have LASIK, iLASIK, or whatever you want to call it. It's simple. There you are. You dock in. Please look when you dock. It's suction. And suction, as it occurs, rotates the eye. That's all you need to remember now. I will take you across to why that is important as we go along. After that, nothing. Lift the flap and do the laser. All this is no great checks. Anybody can do that. What do you get in femto? A smooth, predictable flap. Absolutely smooth. No induced aberrations. And my examiner can go and do a custom ablation based on wavefront and remove pre-existing aberrations, giving the patient perfect vision. While SMILE can't even look at the aberrations, it can't correct the aberrations, it can't reduce the aberrations. And that is it. There you have one more. You have this LASIK that goes on here. Oh, sorry. Please look what occurs now. Lift the flap. There's a blinking of the reticule. The reticule starts to blink. What is going on at that time? You're doing iris recognition. Recognition is going on. The reticule stops blinking. That's because recognition has taken place. Whatever cyclotorsion that took place has been recognized, has been compensated. It continues. There you see. I'm sorry, I keep doing the wrong thing. So, it compensates, locks on, and stays locked on throughout the procedure. So, it compensates for any movement of the eye as well as cyclotorsion that could occur, active cyclotorsion tracking, which is very important if you're doing astigmatism over 1 or 2. So if you don't have all of this, how are you going to get any accuracy? In SMILE, you have no iris recognition. You have no way of taking cyclotorsion. So you have a 4-cylinder, and you're off by 10 degrees. I'm so sorry, you're going to get 1.5 cylinder left over again. So if you have all these kind of problems as suction loss, it's a disaster. I just went by the Zeiss stall. That's why my presentation got a little longer. They have this room on top. In the corner, they have this huge, big, fat Dell computer. It's meant only for SMILE complications. They let you look at this, dark spots. So you can't lift the flap there. Then suction loss. And it changes as per, can't find the lenticule. Oh my, look at that. You can't find the lenticule. So you got to search for it, take the patient back, do op scan, do a topography, do biometry again, look at the thickness, search for it, go back next day, go through this nomogram, try to look for it. And God forbid you have an undercorrection, overcorrection. You got to go back to PRK. All the pain-free status goes out of the window, and then you go back to scraping it, and then doing a PRK to get rid of this. So, no cylinder axis verification, it's a real problem in every eye. Every time we talk about toric lenses, we say 1 degree off is 3% of astigmatism. How many degrees off are we in SMILE, in correction of astigmatism? So when you do SMILE, it's going to be difficult with small powers because it's going to be a thin flap. You can't pull out a 10 micron flap, you take a thicker block. So whether you do a -10 or a -1, you take out a thick block. So where is your safety that you talk about there? Let's forget about all that. So by SMILE, it's a beautiful femtosecond laser. By the excimer, 2 femtosecond LASIK with a SMILE. And I like to declare my financial involvement with Zeiss. You're a consultant, I'm a partner. The amount of money I spent with them, they made me honorary partner. And I also bought this SMILE.
Dr. Rupal Shah.
You bought a SMILE.
As I told you.
What
science,
more can I say?
Science. As I told you, I'm going to use, let's go back one slide. Buy SMILE, buy excimer, do femtosecond LASIK with a SMILE.
That already you had, so why then?
Better. I agree that the VisuMax is
Okay,
brilliant.
I would just like to answer the specifics that you have asked. Okay, you've talked about suction losses. There are a number of cases that have been presented, reported, and experienced from years together where we had suction losses and we could operate on that same day, doing the same procedure, getting the same result the next day as you would get with a normal SMILE procedure. Secondly, all these increased things that we need to do in an excimer laser about cyclotorsion, about wavefront guided treatments is because the excimer laser has limitations and therefore you need to do it. In the SMILE, you are cutting out a lenticule and you can decide the profile that you want on that particular lenticule. Treated one eye femtolasic, the other eye SMILE, a head-on study in 25 patients of eye myopia and also determined all these factors. Cyclorotation occurs, and I agree with it that it occurs and needs to be taken care of, but not when you are actively holding the cornea. And you can mark the cornea, make sure that you are in the 0-180 degrees, and then there is no question of cyclorotation while the procedure is on because you are bang on. There is no change that is occurring, it's actively holding that eye. So there is no cyclorotation occurring later on. And what was the fourth thing that you said? Retreatment, yes, we are still dependent on the excimer laser for it, but you can convert the cap into a flap. There is a special software which is there, called a circle software, which can convert your cap into a flap and then you can use an excimer laser. We have to remember this is 5.5 years that we are talking about. If NASA would have known this technique at that time when it gave approval to femtolasic, it would have definitely considered and given approval to SMILE over femtolasic, and there is still time. NASA still has time to decide whether it wants to change its policy. So it may approve femtolasic, but it may prefer that their astronauts have SMILE in their eyes rather than having a flap, just so as they can avoid any problems in the space.
Exactly what I said.
Any other thing?
The present is femto-assisted LASIK. The future could be something else. It could be SMILE, could be something else.
Anything else that you...
The winner is Dr. Arulmozhi Verma.
I think both sides debated very well. Points were excellently brought out. But I think we'll settle with that because the audience poll showed more hands. Thank you very much.
We have the next group of pair of wrestlers, Dr. Mohan Rajan and Dr. Samaresh. You ready? Get ready.
Yeah, I go
Dr.
first.
Mohan Rajan will...
Obviously, 1.8 is always the first Sachin Tendulkar. Come on. Can you have any comparison? Yes, Stellaris is also the same. Now, let's see. And Abhay Vasudha was telling me, what is there in Stellaris? because he was telling me my son-in-law is mad after Stellaris. Now, Vishali tells her husband, I want you to do only 2.2 millimeter Alcon because she is a genetic Alcon ophthalmologist. Whereas Samaresh says, no, I want to do only 1.8 Bausch & Lomb. So Vishali is actually having the Ozil technology between her father and husband, Ozil. But I found Samaresh in his operation theatre on a Stellaris machine which he likes very much. So what is this 1.8 millimeter we are all talking about? Look at these videos. You will come into a conclusion right away. I don't have to argue in a debate. Hard cataracts, brown cataracts, black cataracts. You can see how this technology works wonderfully well. Small pupils, patient on Urimax. Half my patients are on Urimax, half my patients are on Viagra. So you can see how the pupil is so floppy. But I don't use a iris retractor. I don't use any iris hooks. Nothing. All with a 1.8. Again, a brown or black cataract. See the excellent stability of the anterior chamber despite the fact I am using very high vacuum. Imagine 600 millimeters on a dual linear in Stellaris. If anybody says this is a cataract, I'll give them some money because it's like a granite inside the eye. You can see it. Such cataracts, on the left you see MICS Stellaris 1.8, crystal clear corneas. On the right, MICP. Because the Alcons, when they came into this technology, they said only 2.2 millimeter I can do. They didn't want to borrow the name from Stellaris or Bausch & Lomb. They said we will name it differently because Alcon is always very different. They said micro-incisional coaxial phacoemulsification. That's called MICP. This is a MICP patient after a brown cataract. And this patient, I called him Hypersol Kandasamy because he had 65 bottles of Hypersol post-operatively. When he came once to for the post-operative clinic, the entire box he was carrying, 65 bottles, he wanted me to pay for all of them, and I asked Alcon to pay it. Post-operatively, you can see the wound in MICS. These are not very soft cataracts, they are all very hard cataracts, pristine. The wound stability, you can see that in Alcon, MICP, wound burn. You know the consequences of a corneal burn. Preoperative endothelial counts, specular endothelial, the induced astigmatism, which works very well. You can see the comparison between, I just take half a minute more. And you can see the comparison between the two, 1.8 on the left and the 2.2. And similar hard cataracts, but how the stability and the speed in which the whole surgery occurs. And Samaresh is on his horse back. And he says, the horse's mouth says, 1.8 millimeter S-mix is the best. And he also